Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Paul Daniels Hot Seat. Back in January, we learned quite a great lesson. We the people had a terrific victory when we helped reject that unwarranted and insipid pay hike for the congressmen and the senators. Tonight we're not going to really talk about the pay raise itself, because we had the great commentators like Pat Buchanan and Fred Barnes and Robert Novak and Bob Grant, and yes, pardon the expression, even Ralph Nader gave us all the reasons for not having that. But there's a lesson to be learned from that, is when we, the people, get together and call and write and let these so-called public servants know what's on our mind, we get results. And we can't let go of that. We had such a great victory. Mind you, it was dealing with 535 congressmen and senators total, and we had a deluge of mail. But even on the other issues, I heard a politician say once on a show, when they get anywhere from 25 to 30 to 75 to 100 letters, they start taking notice. So we have to learn and keep in mind what we did in January. And this is a conservative talk show, and I want all you people who are conservatively thinking out there to write and call your assemblymen, your state senators, your United States congressmen and United States senator, and let them know what's on your mind on the most important issues, whether it be pro-life, the wild car insurance mess that we have, the right to bear arms, the runaway spending, and the toll hikes that they want to give to cover that, and the taxes and the user fees, which is another name for taxes. Let them know what's on your mind on these subjects. And also when fighting Marxist communists and to support freedom fighters, and in this state of New Jersey, most important, support for initiative and referendum. They're all in your phone book, whether it be your assemblyman or state senator, congressman or senator, United States senator. They're all in the phone book. Their phone numbers are there. Just call them up, make it short and brief, and they jot down. We found out this past January, every call, every letter is recognized. And when you go to the post office, get 10 postcards, 20 postcards, keep them somewhere handy, and when something's on your mind, write to them. We can't let this pass by, this great lesson of the rejecting of the congressional pay raise. So we just want to remind you, don't be a couch potato. Get involved. Write your senators, your assemblymen, your congressmen, your senators, and whatever on your mind, let them know, because they do take notice, and maybe we could stop being dumped on for a change. So don't forget, get those cards and letters in the mail, call them, because they do take notice. The music to their ears is when people say, it doesn't matter. It does. Call and write your congressmen, your senators, your assemblymen, and your state senators. Tonight on the Paul Daniels program here, we have Father Wickens, priest, lecturer, author, pastor of St. Anthony's of Padua Chapel in Livingston, New Jersey. He celebrates the traditional Latin Mass, also known as the Trinidine Mass, and he's a true promoter of the true faith. Father Wickens, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here.
We had you on once before, and the reaction was very nice.
Good.
And we wanted to get you on, especially during this great time of Easter. And later on in the program, we're going to talk about this great holiday and holy day of Easter and the passion and suffering of our Lord Jesus Christ and His great resurrection. But before that, we're going to touch upon some of the subjects that we went over last time. We're going to briefly go over them. As far as modernism versus the traditional teachings of the Catholic Church. And if you will, give us an outline of what your movement, the one you're in, is involved as compared to the modernism in the Catholic Church today.
Well, back in 1907, a saintly pontiff, the last pope that has been canonized, Pope Pius X, he was the last pope who was raised to the dignity of sainthood, condemned a heresy called modernism in no uncertain terms. He condemned it in an encyclical, he condemned it in a motu proprio. And modernism, as a matter of fact, he said anyone who embraces modernism is really excommunicated from the Catholic Church. Now, what is modernism? Modernism simply is an attempt to update doctrine and morality. It simply cannot be done. We hold, as Catholics, that doctrine and morality comes from the essence of God. through his Son Jesus Christ. And this doctrine and morality remains unchanged. It cannot change over the centuries. Technology can change, economics can change, political life can change. But the doctrines of Jesus Christ, who is God, do not change. Now, a modernist attempts to change that. He attempts to say that these commandments don't matter anymore, that these particular doctrines, the doctrines of heaven, hell, and purgatory, for example, don't really matter. The doctrine of transubstantiation doesn't really matter. Now, the way a modernist does this is he doesn't come out and say, I no longer believe in hell, or I no longer believe in sin. He doesn't say that because he would tip his hand. But what a modernist does is he simply doesn't talk about it anymore. And number two, the liturgy that he comes up with, the liturgical expression, no longer clearly expresses these traditional doctrines. So the new Mass, which most parishes have in most dioceses in New Jersey, the new Mass, compared to the traditional Latin Mass, well, this new Mass, which is usually in English, or it could be in Polish, or whatever, it's in the vernacular. Usually this Mass does not as strongly express the divinity of Christ. There's less genuflections, there's less sign of the crosses, there's less kneeling, there's no altar rails, the Blessed Sacrament in the tabernacle is moved to the side. See, these are all little things, Paul, that take away from the divinity of Christ.
Now, Father, most of these changes were churned out after Post-Vatican II, right? And they, like you said, they piecemealed it little by little. And last time we talked about the external devotions and signs of religion. Most of them went also, slowly but surely.
Well,
like you mentioned, communion. Not only don't you have to kneel anymore, but you can stand and have it placed in your hand. And now, wasn't that a privilege amongst the priests, the holding of the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ?
Sure. The priest's hands are consecrated by the holy oils, and he alone can touch the sacred species, the sacred chalice, and the sacred host. Only the priest, unless there was an emergency, obviously. I remember a case years ago in a parish I was stationed in Orange, New Jersey. There was a fire. I mean, a raging fire. And the pastor gave the fireman, who had on his oxygen mask, to go in, open the tabernacle, and take out the ciborium. Now, that was an emergency situation, obviously, and that was correct. But the liberals, the modernists, they're really interchangeable, those two words here. They have taken the exception and made it the rule. And that is, anyone can touch the chalice, anyone can touch the sacred species. They can actually put the Blessed Sacrament in their hands. Now, this was done by a small group of people who got into key positions in the church, liturgical committees, for example. And these key people came up to the bishops and they said, everyone's doing it, this is good, this is the new way of thinking. And most of the bishops are not really theologians. Most of the bishops, Paul, are more administrators. You know, they're running big operations, school, hospital, parish, making ends meet, things like that. And they kind of leave the theological working out of things to others. And of course that was a mistake, because these others were influenced by a small number of modernists. But they came in disguise. That's how they do it, you see. They don't come in saying, I'm a modernist, I'm going to try to destroy the Catholic faith. They come in by saying there's a shift in emphasis, Your Excellency, you know. There's a new trend, there's a new way of looking at things. Or we're not denying the old, that's how they say it. And the bishop, who's very often weak and under a lot of pressure, okay, he says, we'll go along with these changes. But these changes gradually lessen our belief in the dogmas and gradually lessen our adherence to the moral laws.
Now that's an important point, because since Post-Vatican II, divorce is up. Infidelity, adultery, rampant.
Correct.
Mass attendance, down.
Way
There's
down.
been a slight resurgence, still nowhere what it used to be. Also, pornography is rampant all over. Respect for one another, human beings, is not even in existence. Religious vocations down. Seminaries closing all over the country.
Right.
This is since Vatican II. So you're really right on the mark when you're saying it slowly but surely had us lessen our devotion.
When doctrinal adherence...
in other words, it's no coincidental it's no accident
Right.
that all these things going up happened at the same time
Right,
when
right.
religious beliefs went down.
Right, when you confront a liberal or a modernist who was all for these changes, and now these changes have been in effect, let's say they really started in 66, we'll say. The Vatican Council closed in 65. And then they began to, quote, implement Vatican II, as they called it. Of course, what they do, they twisted Vatican II to make it mean whatever they wanted it to mean. So it's really over 20 years now. And if you point to them and say, well, listen now, we've had all these changes for 20 years. It's been a colossal failure. You said that these changes were going to have a resurgence of faith, was going to help marriages, increase vocations to the priesthood and religious life. But it's been just the opposite. We're closing schools left and right. I was over today to Bayonne, New Jersey. And there's a beautiful church over there, St. Henry's. I mean, a beautiful church. It must have been built turn of the century. And Bayonne is a heavily populated Catholic town. No school. School's closed 4 years ago. And the one some blocks away is on the ropes. It's down to 150 students. Formerly there was 1,500. It's been literally decimated, 1/10. So all these so-called promised results, the reverse happened. Now, if you confront a modernist and you say, well, look at all the vital signs of the church have gone down. Well, they won't blame themselves, because that's one thing a liberal will never do. He'll never blame himself. He'll say, well, it's the trend. There's been a decline all over, or it's the fear of the nuclear bomb, or they'll always blame something else. That's one of the signs of a liberal. They don't know how to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's impossible. It's out of their vocabulary. Yeah. Even, as you know, politically, it's politico/moral. When they talk about crime and the increase in crime, they always blame somebody else. It's never the perpetrator. The perpetrator was under pressure, or he was poor, or, it's always some excuse. Well, they do the same here. They take away personal responsibility and they blame it on something else. As you mentioned too, Paul, you said that on Mass attendance, which went from 70% of the Catholics went to Mass to below 30% in the United States. And now and then there'll be a slight little blip on the radar screen. It'll go up 1% or 2%. And people say, what a trend. It's coming back. And it's just like crime in these cities, like, say, Newark or Elizabeth or Patterson. And there'll be, let's say, 1 year, 500 homicides. And the next year there was only 490. They'll say, see, there's really a trend. But it's so infinitesimal that it's not a trend. And matter of fact, next year it'll be up to 520. So it's just that statistics don't remain right on the same identical level. They will fluctuate within a 5% elastic zone,
And also there were some arguments, it's more relevant to the people. They won't be hearing it in Latin, they'll know what's going on. I mean, how lazy could you be, Father? Latin on one side of the missal, the English translation right next to it. So what was great about the Catholic Church, it was one. No matter if you were in South America, Africa, the United States, the Mass was always the same. You could bring your prayer book with you, the Mass was the same, and you'd be able to follow it. It's not that way anymore. So that argument went out. That was such a weak argument. They want to make it more representation to the people, let them understand it better. Well, all you have to do is read, and it's there.
It's there, yeah. The new Mass.
In other words, Father, another thing I want to mention, that the Mass was supposed to be a sacrifice. In some churches, it's become a show with the guitars, dancing. They have dancing nuns and everything.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a sacrifice. It's not there for you to sit back and be entertained.
Exactly.
It's there for you to sacrifice, concentrating on you, your relationship with God, and pray.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Some of the people, like we have the traditional Latin Mass. We have it up in, you want me to tell where we have it?
Sure.
We have the traditional Latin Mass in Livingston at 305 Eisenhower Parkway. We have it there every Sunday, 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. We have the traditional Latin Mass. And we have the traditional signs of reverence that go with it, kneeling down and following in your missal and so forth. And women wear head covering, and the men and women both come to church in more or less their Sunday best. With the new Mass, people got very sloppy habits. I mean, women come in shorts.
Oh, yeah.
And men come, just come from the backyard or something. They don't dress up. And but with the traditional Latin Mass that we have every Sunday, we have when people find out about it, lots of people say, boy, I'd love to come back to a traditional Mass. Other people, though, have gotten used to the new Mass. And I put that on a parallel with being hooked on television, you know. Like television's kind of a passive media, you know. You come home from work, you take off your shoes, and you turn it on. There's not much cerebrating necessary. You're sort of entertained. Now, I'm not condemning television, although much of it is, as you know, sleaze. Mm-hmm. But there is some wholesome television. Matter of fact, we're on television right now, correct? So television is like any part of the media. It can be used for good or for evil. But I equate people who are hooked on television. They come home and they turn it on, and they never read a book. They never have much conversation. They don't have much to do with the family. They make no effort to have communication with one another in the home. Well, when you go to the new Mass, it's similar to that. There's like no effort required. You go there and you're entertained. The different people come up and speak in the pulpit, and then the priest will crack a joke, and then they'll have a handshake, and then have some lively music. See, now in the traditional Mass, there's every bit as much participation, if not more. But the participation is not ostentatious. The participation is really where it belongs, primarily, and that is in the heart and in the soul. That you take your missal and you follow along with the priest and try to unite yourself with the priest who stands in the name of Christ. So with the missal, you're really uniting yourself with Christ as he offers himself up to God the Father as he did on Calvary. And as that you say, it is the sacrifice of Calvary. It's not a theatrical act. It's not a meal only in a secondary or tertiary sense. But it's primarily a reenactment of Calvary.
It wouldn't have been so bad if they only translated what we said in Latin directly into English, but they actually changed the liturgy, which I believe it was Pope Pius X, am I right? Saying that should not ever be changed.
No, it goes back farther than that.
Well, he reinforced that, didn't he?
After the Pope Pius XII reinforced it, yes.
Pope Pius XII.
But it goes back to the time of St. Pius V. After the Protestant Reformation and all that, Henry VIII broke away and Martin Luther and all that, and Pius V said, listen, there's one way that we're going to prevent any diluting of doctrine, and that is to maintain the Mass as we have it. And he said, this was in 1570, he said the Mass as it stands now in 1570 should remain the same now and in perpetuity. In Latin it is in perpetuum. In English, it's almost the same, in perpetuity. And that's never been revoked or changed. So how did this new Mass come in? Well, in 1966-67, a small little cadre of liberals got together, and they wrote up a new Mass, and they put it on the desk of Pope Paul VI and got him to sign it. And because they sold Pope Paul VI a bill of goods, they said, oh, it's going to be great. We're going to have more vocations. We're going to have more people at Mass and all that. And Pope Paul VI, who relies, as every Pope does, Paul, the Pope relies heavily upon his advisors, just like a president does or anything else. They rely very much upon their advisors. And they advised him imprudently. And he went ahead and signed it. And then as the years went on, Pope Paul VI began to panic a little bit. He said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And they said, no. You have to give it enough time. You have to implement it. Give it a little more time. A little more time. And then the Pope got a little more scared when he saw the vital signs of the Church changing. No, Holy Father, you have to give it enough time. People are making adjustments. People are slow to change. Now here we are. He died. And we have a new Pope now for a little over 10 years. And it's the same thing. But now, this present pontiff, he kind of followed the same line as Paul VI. But now, in the past couple of years, actually 4 years ago, he gave out what they call an indult. And that is that he was saying to the bishops, let the people have the traditional Mass. Now, in the past year, he's gone a step beyond that. And now he is urging the bishops of the world to have more and more traditional Mass, because the traditional Mass is the foundation is the contact that most people have with their Catholic faith. So now in New York City, for example, there are 2 locations on Sunday where the traditional Mass is said: St. Agnes on 43rd Street and St. Anthony of Padua up on 114th Street, which is the beginning, I think, of Harlem. And so they have 2 places in Manhattan under the auspices of the Archdiocese of New York where they have the traditional Mass. So if you counted up the traditional Masses that are allowed by the diocese, if you counted them up now in 1989 and compare them, say, to 5 years ago, it's many, many, many more. Now, it still hasn't caught on enough by any means, but I think there's a crack in that wall. I think that the liberals are retreating a little bit, and what is most important, the people in the Vatican, and sometimes they're the last ones to know, the people in the Vatican who make these decisions have come little by little to the conclusion that these changes have been deleterious, and they're not making a one fell swoop restoration of the traditional liturgy. That's not the way it works. But the wheels are moving, and there seems to be a gradual trend. Now, it's going to be a while. It's not tomorrow, it's not next year, but it has started. In the meantime, priests like myself, we're anticipating this, and we're maintaining our own traditional chapels, because we know many people can't wait 10 years or 20 years. Suppose you have children who are 5, 10, 12. Can they wait 10 years? Can they wait 20 years? Of course they can't. Yeah. So that's why we have to go ahead and interpret the mind of Pius V and have as many traditional Masses as we can.
You know, I'm sure most Catholics out there that don't attend Mass, there was a certain thing that triggered that. And I was in a church where the changes came slower than usual. Our pastor was from the old school. He really didn't like them. The breaking point I had with the modern Mass, it was getting to me, seeing not young children, but grown people coming to church in certain towns in shorts. Right. And then a woman getting out of the pew to help the priest hand out communion.
Yeah.
The thing that really drew it for me was when they changed it from God created man, and they changed it to God created men and women.
Yeah.
And that, to me, was giving in to the feminist movement. The very people that I am fighting, and the Catholic Church should be fighting, the radical feminists, yeah, they acquiesce to them and changes the liturgy according to the feminist movement. That's the straw that broke the camel's back for me. And
that's very accurate, Paul. That really has happened. In many areas, the bishops of the United States who have a conference, they call it the NCCB, National Conference of Catholic Bishops, and they meet. They have standing committees. Matter of fact, they have a tremendous building in Washington they've just put up, and all kinds of monsignors and priests and secretaries and whatever. Generally, the NCCB espouses what we would call liberal causes, like oppose aid to the Contras, favor feminist things. For example, they would say, let's change the language of the scriptures. I had a priest tell me in a parish here in the Archdiocese of Newark that they have a nun who is a DRE. DRE means Director of Religious Education. And she insisted that when the priest read the story of the prodigal son, which everybody knows, a man had 2 sons, and one son took off, spent his father's fortune, repented, and came back, and the father took him back. Well, the nun insisted that the part where the other son was jealous and angry because he came back and he was faithful all these years, so you better eliminate that when you read it in the Mass, because that doesn't belong there. They're tampering with the scriptures, and even not only eliminating phrases in the scriptures, but they're changing words. Like, for example, you say where it would say, and God made man, they would say, and God made man and woman. Yeah. And also they refer to God now sometimes as she, or sometimes they will not refer to God as him, so they'll just do all kinds of broken field running So whenever they refer to God with the proper noun, a pronoun, instead of saying he, they'll make sure that they won't use he. They'll just change it around.
And it's not being chauvinistic at all, because everybody knew from the beginning of time that when they say man, that was an abbreviation for mankind, including men and women. So it was such a nonsensical thing that I just couldn't tolerate it. I seen so much going before my eyes, and that was just, I could not adhere to that.
You're caving into to one aspect of the feminist movement, and the feminist movement, make no mistake about it, opposes the Christian principles of marriage, as far as childbearing, and that they have separate roles in the home. The feminist movement is the enemy of the teachings of Jesus Christ regarding life itself and marriage itself. And they cannot have the church embrace its whole agenda at once, so they do things like embrace their language. And then the next step is something else. That's how they do it. It's a little by little infiltration type of thing.
And being a feminist is not just being for equal pay for the same work. You're not really a feminist. Anybody with common sense is for things like that. Father's alluding to is the real feminist hardcore movement goes way beyond things like that. And they want to do social structuring that is to the detriment of our nation. And Father, many different outward signs, probably all the discipline went out of religion. So outward signs, which you feel are so important.
That's
you
right.
gave a good analogy about that. Like, repeat that one. When you go to visit your mother, you bring her gifts?
Yeah. When the liberals say, we can change all these liturgical expressions, after all, they're not important. What really matters is what's in your heart, see? So if you say, listen, I want to kneel, they'll say, listen, it doesn't matter if you kneel. What matters if you believe in your heart? I want to receive communion on the tongue. I want to fold my hands. They'll say, that doesn't matter, those external things. What matters is what's in your heart. But the analogy we